In the name of Allah, most compassionate, most merciful. Uh, Hello, my students, to the last part in our course, Literary Stylistics. In this course, we are going to see other topics that we can deal, that we can study in literary stylistics, okay? The topics that we find in literature, in the works of literature. These topics are suggested by the scholar Mikhail Tular, 1996. The first topic is modality and attitude. Modality, it denotes, according to Tulan, modality denotes the linguistic means available for qualifying any claim or commitment one makes in language in order to express attitude and judgment. It means that in order to express my attitude and judgment, I'm going to use models which are going to express my attitude. So here to learn suggests it will be clear when you see this example. Now, to learn suggests the following example. Billings is in Montana. Billings is not in Montana. So you see that in both of these two sentences, the sense is absolute, okay? The first is positive and the second is negative. Now, I have two sentences, positive and negative, where the meaning is absolute. Now, I am going to express my attitude through using models in these sentences. So, in qualifying my attitude, it can be through probability, obligation, willingness, and usuality. So, in probability, we add the modal might. Billings might be in Montana. So here I am expressing something probable. It's not an absolute meaning using the modal might. But if I express obligation, I use should. Billings should be in Montana. If willingness, Billings would be in Montana. Usuality, Billings is always in Montana. So you see that these models might, should, would, always, they express my attitude, where the meaning is not absolute. The first, it conveys the meaning of probability. The second, should, conveys the meaning of obligation. Would expresses willingness, and always expresses usuality. The second, of course, now how it is related in literature, if it is the writer, when in the speech of his characters, the characters, for example, in a novel, the characters use models, might, should, would, always, of course, frequently, which occur too much in the text. So it becomes a stylistic feature that we need to be analyzed. Okay? And of course, it's going to convey a meaning in relation to the story in the novel. The second topic, it refers to processes and participation. Tulan says that in English language, every verb describes a different process. We have verbs, and these verbs describe actions, okay? So if we take the first example, riding a bike, what does it describe? What action? It is a physical action, a physical activity. When we say walking a path is also a physical activity. But if you say being an undergraduate, here it is a status description. So there is an action described through these verbs. Now, sorry. Here, Tulan says that the verbs can be classified verbs in the word in any language. He says that verbs in any language can be classified or categorized into four major actions. The action of doing, to do, the verbs which express doing, verbs which express the action of thinking, verbs which express the action of saying, and verbs which characterizing. It means used for describing. Okay, so he says that verbs in any language are grouped into these four categories. So they are termed as follows: processes of doing. Here they refer to what we call physical activity, like walking, like riding. Processes of mental activity with verbs like sensing, thinking. Processes of communicating, like saying, telling, reporting. Processes of characterizing, like describing, or an X is as Y, etc. So, and these processes are termed formally as follows by Tolan. We can refer to them: material processes, mental processes, verbal processes, relational processes. So here process, it means to verbs. It means verbs or actions. Of course, in all these processes, I need participants. It means people who act or are acted upon. Of course, we need participants who do these verbs. We need time and we need a place where this action takes place, of course. So they are participants, time and place are connected to the concept of process and participation. The third topic we can study in a literary text is how does the writer report the speech and the thought of his characters. I think you are familiar with this topic, so I am going to go quickly with it. You can read it later on, okay, and it is explained in your handouts. So characterizing speech and thought are basically reported through the following structures. When you say, for example, she said, quotation, I am sorry, I can't stop right now. Here, this is a reported speech, a case of a reported speech. And every reported speech is composed of two parts. The first part in green is called the framing clause. And what information does the framing clause provide me? It supplies a frame telling you who is doing the speaking or thinking. Okay? So this first part is called the framing clause. The second part, I am sorry, I can't stop right now. It is in blue or purple. It is called the dependent clause. It records the character's speech or thought. Okay, so here the first case is an example of a speech. If we read the second sentence, she wondered why those types always picked out her to ask. You see here, wondered is not said. Wondered is referred to thought, to wonder. It's not like saying. So here this is a reported thought, we say. We do not say that it is a reported speech, but it is a reported thought. So these two sentences, 1 and 2, the first one is an example of a direct speech. I think you know this. And the second one is an example of an indirect thought. Okay? Because there are no quotation, there is no semicolon, etc. So we have two cases of reporting here, direct speech and indirect thought. We can, of course, transform the first and the second sentence. We transfer them from direct to indirect and from indirect thought to direct thought. So it means that we can report what the characters say or think differently. Okay, so we come up with the following sentences. She wondered to herself, why do these types always pick out me to ask? You see quotation, so it becomes wondered, so it is thought, and between quotation marks, so it is a direct thought. She said she was sorry, but she couldn't stop right then. Here it is an indirect speech. Now, consider the following sentences. We have a different way of reporting speech and thought of the characters. If we read in a novel, I'm sorry, I can't stop right now. Or why not? Why do these types always pick out me to ask? you see that these two reported speeches and thoughts do not have the framing clause. We don't have who is talking here or who is wondering or thinking. So there is the first part does not exist. They are free from the framing clause. Okay? So the first one, so both are free of the narrator's framing clause, so they are labeled free direct speech and free direct thought. They are reported speech and thought without the framing clause. Okay? So they are free direct speech and free direct thought. So whenever there is no framing clause, it is referred to free. Okay? And as a result, Toulon says that we have 6 distinct categories of speech or thought, of course. Free direct thought, when there is no framing clause, of course, or there is direct thought, indirect thought, free indirect thought. Then the second one, the first one is the category about thought, the second one about speech. You can have free direct speech, it means direct speech without the framing clause, or direct speech only, indirect speech, or free indirect speech. That means indirect speech without the framing clause. So free indirect thought, this one, and free indirect speech are both termed as, it is just a question of terminology, so do not be confused, okay? So are referred to as free indirect discourse. So when I say free indirect discourse, I am referring to free indirect thought and free indirect speech. Both are under the label of free indirect thought. That's all. The last case of reporting speech and thought of characters, look here. She then decided she wouldn't, no matter what they said. She resolved not to whatever the circumstances. She set her mind entirely against it. So you see, first, there is no framing clause, and it is not clear whether it is speech or thought. Okay, so here there are a different type of reporting speech or thought. Here the writer has reported the speech and the thought of the characters in a narrational way, in the form of narration, like to narrate a story. So the writer here has narrated the speech of the characters, has narrated, so has put the speech of the characters in a narrative mode, in a narrative way. Or he has expressed the thought of the characters, not directly or indirectly, but in a narrative way. Okay, so these are scant traces of the character's voice in these versions, and the voice is fully narrational. So these sentences are a type of narrative sentences, narrate in the narrator's words the character is speaking or thinking. So they are a transitory kind between indirect discourse and narration of visible physical actions, because they move away from direct observation of event. So this case of reporting, it means the narrational report of the character's speech or thought, is referred to as pure narrative sentences. Okay? And they are referred to as NRDA. Okay? And it goes to narrative reports of discoursal acts. So it's just a question of terminology. Do not be confused. Now, why I have got a novel, why I decide to study the speech and thought modes. It means how does the writer report the speech and the thought of his character in this particular novel? Because the way how the writer reports the speech of his characters is significant and implies some meanings, okay? What are these meanings? For example, so here Toulon states the following objective. So it is important to know this, okay? When you decide to study how does the writer report the thought and the speech of his characters. He says, it is important to recognize how authors modulate characters' reflection. Now, if the writer uses the structure free ID. FID. Here we said it stands for free indirect thought or free indirect speech. All are under the level of free indirect discourse. So if the writer reports the speech of his character in this form, free indirect speech or free indirect thought, so here he wants to convey an irony, to ironize a character's views. Okay? Now, if the writer uses the indirect speech, it means that he reports the speech of his characters in an indirect way or NRSA, then it is an indication that the character's precise words are not of great importance. Okay? It means, but it should not appear only in one case, but this, for example, indirect speech, whenever the writer gives voice or reports the speech of his character, he reports it in the indirect speech, okay? When it is repeated frequently in this novel, then here you will see why, you understand, because they are not of great importance. When the writer uses the indirect speech, it's to tell me that the words of this character, I interpret them as being not important. Contrary, if the writer uses the direct speech, quotation mark, colon, etc., here the narrator indicates that a character's spoken words are either admirable or distasteful. He gives the impression that the character is an independent individual speaking on his behalf in his own words. So here there is importance. So if the writer uses direct speech, okay, so I understand that there is importance to what this character is saying. Okay. Now, next topic we can study in the narrative, in the novel or short story, etc., is the narrative structure. It means how this narrative is structured. What are the elements of this narrative? So here Toulon has based his elements of the structure on the works of the American sociolinguist William Nabov, suggested that the who studied the oral studies of young African American men in New York, and come up with the following elements. Okay, so these are according to Toulon, which he took them from William Nabov. We can in every narrative we can depict the following elements. Okay, structures. Voila. The first one is the first element. It refers to an abstract. It is clearly defined. So, so in abstract, what happened? How can you attract the attention to this story? In the second element, it refers to orientation. Who was involved? When and where was this? So here we are talking about sentences describing participants, the time and place of events, but not the events themselves. Okay. The third element of the story is called complicating action. Here in the complicating action, you are going to tell me what happened in the story, then what happened after it. Okay, so here it refers to the all important and ordered events, okay, of the story you state in this section of complicating action. The next element is evaluation. How have you added to the basic story to highlight and how it is interesting or relevant to your addressee, to you or the teller. So here you are going to express your reactions to the events being reported in the story. Next component of the narrative is the resolution. Here it refers to the narrative's answer to the question, so what finally happened? It means how did the narrative end, or how does it resolve its issue? Because, and you have to know, as you know, that not all narratives have clear resolution. This is known, of course. Last element, it is called coda, and here it answers the question, how does the story relate to us here and now? Or does it supply a moral or a lesson learned by the protagonist or teller? So you answer these questions, okay? If you would like to analyze a narrative using the approach of to learn, so you have to go to consider all these elements, okay? You answer all these questions and consider all these elements in literature, of course. The next topic we can study in literary stylistics as far as literature is concerned, it is diction. And as we know, diction, it refers to the writer's word choice of words. Words are important in literature, okay? They determine the style and tone of a piece of writing. They also aid in direct characterization when applied to a character's dialogue. Also, using particular words instead of others, even if they have similar meaning, it's going to affect the reader's interpretation. Of course, in the diction, choice of words, it means what type of words does the writer in this novel use, okay? There are many types of diction. You can say there is type formal diction, informal diction, pedantic, pedestrian, slang, colloquial, abstract diction, concrete diction, and poetic diction. You can have my students' definition of these types of diction in the website grammarly.com, okay? And you will see more elaboration on every type of diction mentioned here, okay? So you decide, okay, when you analyze the diction of in this novel or in this poem, you say which type does the writer use, okay? Is it a formal diction, informal diction, colloquial diction, concrete diction, poetic diction, etc., okay? Next topic we consider in the analysis of literary text is it refers to talking acts of give and take. Now, when I perform and when I say a sentence, like the following sentence: Good morning, Mrs. Barnes. What is the meaning I convey in this sentence? In this sentence, I am performing the function, it has the function of greeting. I am greeting Mrs. Barnes. So, greeting is the function of this speech. And greeting is considered, the function is as an act. It is like an act. So, I perform the act of greeting through language. I perform the act of greeting through this sentence, through this speech. So this is why it is called what we call speech act. So what do we mean by a speech act? In a speech act, we perform acts through speeches. In this example, good morning, Mrs. Barnes, I have performed the act of greeting through this speech, through this speech utterance. It is called a speech act. Now let's take another example. If you say, I am so sorry, darling. Now, what is the act or the function in this sentence? I am apologizing. So here I am performing the act of apology through this speech, through this sentence. So I am so sorry, darling, is a speech act in which I perform the act of apology through this sentence, through this speech. Another speech act: I love that coat on you. In this sentence, I am conveying compliment. I am conveying the act of complimenting, okay, through this speech. The act of complimenting is conveyed through this sentence. Now, if we take the next sentence, could you please phone back before 5? Here, this speech act, I am performing the act of requesting through this speech. So this is why we have speech act. It is an act which I perform via a speech. Okay? Uh, so the study of speech act is the most efficient tool for the study of the language of dialogues. It means when you study dialogue in conversations, in dialogues and conversations in literary text, in the novel, in the short story, or in drama, we can refer to the speech act theory that is provided by Austin and Sir. Okay? We are going to elaborate more on this speech act theory when we deal with the third type of in linguistics, which is called pragmatic linguistics. Okay? So, next point now. My students, when I talk with someone, I exchange either ideas or I exchange information or I seek when I would look for when I uh, ask a question, I'm seeking for information or seeking for knowledge in my interaction with someone. So either I give him ideas or information or knowledge, or I seek from him, I get from him information or knowledge. So there is an exchange. But this exchange of in conversation is not only limited to the exchange of information and giving or seeking information, but also in some conversations there is exchange of goods and services when you provide goods, when you give services to people. So there are two types of exchanges in conversations. So there is mental, where it is refers to exchanging information between me and my interlocutor, or it is physical, when I give or I get goods and services. So this exchange is at two levels, mental and physical. There is, and then you will have in your handouts more elaboration on this exchange and classification of this mental and physical processes of exchange in the conversation, and it is clear, okay? It is clearly explained in your handouts. The next point or topic we can study in a narrative or in a novel, in literature in general, is the topic of foreground and background. So simply, before I read, so the foreground information is the opposite of the background information. The foreground information is the information that is important. The background information is the secondary information, okay? And mostly the important information always occurs at the beginning of the sentence or at the beginning of the paragraph, because the focus is on the this information, so it is foregrounded. Okay, so the information that is important is foregrounded. Okay, foregrounded, but it means it is put at the beginning of the sentence to show this is the important idea. Foreground, as opposed to background. Background is the secondary information that follows. Tolan says, usually narratives contain foreground and background information. The foreground information mostly comes at the beginning of sentences. It refers to the important idea. Tolan suggests the following sentence from Oden's Musée des Beaux-Arts. So, where suffering is foregrounded. So, let's read the sentence. About suffering, they were never wrong, the old masters. So here we read the topic of suffering is foregrounded. It is at the beginning because it is the focus of the work, okay? It is foregrounded. It is the important idea that the writer is going to talk about, so it is foregrounded and it comes at the beginning. So it is obvious always when we talk or when we write, even when we write a research paper, always the most important idea comes at the beginning. We start with the most important idea, which is the foregrounded idea. And foreground, of course, occurs in many levels, in all types of literature. They can occur in poems. They can occur at the level of the lexics. Okay, and concerning the background information, it always accompanies the expression of the sequence of the events. As I said, the background information is secondary. Is the secondary information. So finally, both foregrounding and background can operate at different levels within a narrative. Okay, it means at the level of lexis, at the level of grammar, maybe at the level of meanings. Meanings start by the first most important ideas, etc. At the level of ideas. Next topic we can depict in literary work is the topic of presupposition and assertion. Or they come in parallel. They are parallel. Tulan distinguishes between between presupposition and assertion as follows. So he defines assertion. It is a typical declarative sentence which claims that such and such was the case. So it is a claim. So it is a declarative sentence in which I state something. I state something. Now, for example, my neighbor smokes. My neighbor smokes. This sentence is an assertion. It is a claim. Okay? I declare, I state a fact that my neighbor smokes. So it is a case of an assertion. Now, what is a presupposition? A presupposition is something that the speaker assumes to be the case prior to making an utterance. It means before I express or before I utter my assertion, I have this knowledge in my head. Okay? It is the speakers, not the sentences, that has presupposition. Let's go to the example. So we have said, my neighbor smokes is an assertion. Okay? Now, so before I articulate this sentence, before I utter this sentence, my neighbor smokes, I have the presuppositions, the following presuppositions. I have this knowledge in my head before I assert, I make my assertion. So this knowledge, the prior knowledge in my head before I assert, is called presupposition. The first, I have a neighbor. It is something before I say this sentence, it is in my head. 2, my neighbor is harming his health. So these two presuppositions are in my head before I make the assertion. So this is why the assertion always goes with presupposition. And presupposition and assertion are very significant in connotation, in analyzing the meaning beyond the literal meaning of the sentences in literary text, of course. Okay? The last topic suggested by Tulan is called entailment. It is also simple, okay? What do we mean by entailment? It is a partial paraphrase of the sentence's assertion. So I have got a sentence. Entailment is the paraphrase of this sentence, simply put, okay? It is a paraphrase. You put it in different words, okay? So it is a stating in different words of part of what is actually stated. A sentence can have different entailments, okay? One sentence can have different entailments. Means I can give you a claim, I can give you an assertion, I write it on the blackboard, and I ask my students in the class to write the entailment to this sentence, and then we will have many entailments because of the many students who are going to paraphrase this same sentence, okay? So here Tulan suggests the following example. John managed to stop in time. So the paraphrase of this sentence is John stopped in time, simply put, okay? So he says that if the first sentence is true, it means if we say John managed to stop in time, it means that sentence 2 is also true. So they go together, okay? And if the first sentence is false, then the second also sentence is false, okay? So he says, if in entailment, the truth of one proposition implies the truth of the other. It means if the first one is true, its entailment, its paraphrase must also be true. And if the sentence is false, its paraphrase is false. That's all. Okay? So we have finished with the main topics suggested by Toulon within the field of literary stylistics. So within the field of literary stylistics. Okay? So these are other topics. Now, I have got, so we are going to conclude with what do we mean by a stylistic feature in literary text? If we talk about stylistic features in non-literary text, we are going to, it is limited only to linguistic elements that characterize the text. Only the stylistic feature. It refers to the linguistic items. Whereas in literature, it is broader. The concept of a stylistic feature in literature is very broad. The concept of stylistic feature in literature is very broad, okay? It is not only limited to the linguistic items, as we have seen in foreground, in gerund, we have seen in simile. These are examples, cases of linguistic items, okay? But in literature, it's not only this. It's not only with linguistic items. So we have linguistic items, as we have seen. 2, we can consider the topics of Toulon, we have just now discussed. And 3, the elements of fiction. Now, how? We know that every work of fiction is composed of theme, point of view, characters, time, place, mood, and tone. Okay? So these are also considered as stylistic features if they are put in an idiosyncratic way. Let's take an example, or you can analyze these elements in any literary text, okay? And they are within the realm of stylistics, okay? Of literary stylistics, okay? And especially when if one of these elements is significant. For example, if we consider the element of point of view, where in a novel like the novel of Toni Morrison, her novel A Mercy, the writer does not use only one point of view. We have got 3 points of views which change according to the character, according to the scope, and according to the aim of the writer would like to achieve. 3 points of view: the first person narrator, the third person narrator, and the objective third person narrator. Okay? So these points of views are worth to be studied, and they are considered as a stylistic feature. Or, for example, if we take place. Place, as we know, it is an important construct in fiction. And sometimes writers transcend the use of the description of the place in order to convey more about character. If, as I said in the lecture, the example of Edgar Allan Poe short story, The Fall of the House of Usher, in which Roderick Usher was put in a room completely dim, completely dark, curtains closed, all this to reflect the state of mind of the depressive case of Roderick Usher. We have seen that there is a great connection between the description of the setting, the room of Roderick Usher, and his state of mind, and his psychology, and his feelings. So place here is regarded as a stylistic feature. Okay? And the same for mood, for tone, for theme, for time, for characters. So, so stylistic features in literature, and that's not all the story, of course. We can talk about other topics within uh, literary stylistics, but we stop here for the moment. Okay, students? So that's all about literary stylistics. I hope everything is clear. Thank you very much for your attention. Bye.